Twin girls see a millionaire with a snake around his neck about to die. Then they do this. Comment, telling me what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better. So subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream echoed through the woods bordering the Green River like a lost lament, cutting through the silence of the sunny Clear Creek morning. Emily Carter, just 4 years old, held tightly to the trembling hand of her twin sister Sophie as they watched the tall, well-dressed man lying among the rocks near the riverbank. A vibrantly colored copperhead was coiling slowly around the stranger's neck, who remained as still as an abandoned statue. The two girls had escaped from their group at the city orphanage during the weekly trip to the city park. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the stern 58-year-old director, had been distracted talking to the caregivers about new city hall regulations, and the twins took the opportunity to explore the trail leading to the river, drawn by the sound of running water and the promise of wildflowers that Emily loved so much. "Sophie, he's not moving," whispered Emily, her brown eyes fixed on the unconscious man. Her dark braids swayed in the wind as she assessed the situation with a maturity that was disconcerting for her age. She had always been the braver of the two, the one who made quick decisions when Sophie was paralyzed by fear. Sophie squeezed her sister's hand even tighter, her identical eyes filled with tears. Since she was little, she had constant nightmares that made her wake up screaming in the middle of the night, disturbing the sleep of all the children at the orphanage. For that reason, she slept alone in a separate bed, away from Emily, which made her feel even more vulnerable and scared during the day. "The snake is going to hurt him," murmured Sophie, her voice almost inaudible. She had a special gift for drawing faces from memory, and even at 4, she could capture the most subtle emotions in people's features. In that moment, she was involuntarily memorizing every detail of the man's pale face, from the worry lines on his forehead to his well-trimmed graying beard. Arthur Lexington, owner of the largest building supply distributor in Clear Creek, had gone out for his usual morning walk, seeking in the solitude of nature a temporary relief from the pain he had carried for 3 years. Since he lost his wife Charlotte in an accident he preferred not to remember, the mansion in the city's upscale neighborhood had become a silent mausoleum where he lived as a recluse, avoiding contact with friends and family. That specific morning, a loose stone had caused him to lose his balance and hit his head on a rock, fainting exactly where the copperhead used to warm itself in the sun. The reptile, feeling the body heat of the unconscious man, had approached and coiled around his neck, seeking warmth without realizing the danger it posed. Emily let go of Sophie's hand and began to look for a stick among the fallen branches near the trees. Her small fingers moved with precision, choosing a branch that was long and sturdy enough. Even at such a young age, she showed an inexplicable connection with nature, able to identify plants and animals that adults didn't recognize. "Stay here, Sophie. I'm going to help him," Emily said, cautiously advancing toward the fallen man. Her steps were calculated, avoiding any sudden noises that could startle the snake. She had learned from the orphanage staff that sudden movements made animals aggressive. Sophie remained frozen, watching her sister approach the danger. Her small hands trembled, but she couldn't move. It was always like this when she faced frightening situations. Her body simply refused to obey her mind. During her nightmares, she constantly saw snakes and other dangerous animals chasing people she loved, and now reality seemed to have merged with her darkest dreams. With delicate movements, Emily lightly touched the copperhead's tail with the tip of the stick. The animal tensed, raising its triangular head, but it didn't strike immediately. Emily continued the movement, gently pushing the reptile away from the man's neck until the snake slithered onto the nearby rocks and disappeared into the vegetation. Sophie "Run to the road. Call someone for help," shouted Emily, kneeling beside Arthur. She could see he was breathing, but there was a patch of blood on his forehead where he had hit his head. Her small hands touched the man's wrist, just as she had seen the nurses do at the orphanage when a child got hurt. Sophie finally managed to move, her small legs running as fast as she could along the trail back to the main road. Tears streamed down her face as she screamed for help, desperately waving at the first passers-by she saw. An elderly couple in a pickup truck stopped immediately upon seeing the desperate child. "There's a man hurt near the river. My sister is with him," cried Sophie, pointing toward the woods. The couple didn't hesitate, immediately calling emergency medical services while following the girl back to the scene of the accident. When they arrived, they found Emily sitting beside Arthur, using her own t-shirt to stanch the bleeding from his forehead. She had torn her clothes without hesitation, showing a protective instinct that impressed the adults present. The man was slowly beginning to regain consciousness, murmuring incoherent words. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, and the paramedics were intrigued to find that 2 4-year-old children had been responsible for the rescue. Arthur was taken to the municipal hospital, still confused about what had happened, but conscious enough to ask about the girls who had saved him. Meanwhile, at the orphanage, Mrs. Eleanor Vance was pacing nervously in the courtyard, finally realizing that Emily and Sophie were missing. Her concern was not genuine. She saw the twins as a constant problem since they arrived at the orphanage 2 years earlier, left on the institution's doorstep without any identification or explanation. Sophie's nightmares disrupted the nightly routine, and Emily's independent personality constantly challenged her strict rules. The director was about to discover that the girls' escape had created a connection that would completely change their lives, and that of a lonely man who had lost all hope of finding meaning again. What she didn't know was that this seemingly chance encounter would hide secrets that threatened to destroy reputations, reveal deep betrayals, and expose a network of corruption that had remained hidden for years in the shadows of the prosperous city of Clear Creek. At Clear Creek Municipal Hospital, Arthur woke up completely 3 hours later, his head wrapped in bandages and a throbbing pain that made him squeeze his eyes shut. The memories of what had happened came in confusing fragments. The morning walk, the fall, and then 2 childish voices that seemed to come from a distant dream. "Mr. Lexington, you were very lucky," said Dr. Charles Roberts, the 42-year-old attending physician on the case. "The concussion was mild, but if those girls hadn't acted so quickly, the situation could have been much more serious. The snake was very close to vital areas of your neck." Arthur tried to concentrate, but his mind was still foggy. Girls? What girls? He couldn't clearly remember seeing children on the trail. His morning walks were always solitary, precisely to avoid contact with other people. 2 little girls, identical twins. They looked to be about 4 years old. One of them pushed the copperhead away with a stick, while the other ran to get help on the road. The paramedics said they've never seen children so young act with such courage and presence of mind. Nurse Sarah Peterson, 55, entered the room carrying a tray of medicine. She had worked at the hospital for over 2 decades and knew Arthur by sight, aware of the tragedy that had devastated his life 3 years earlier. "Mr. Lexington, the girls left this for you," she said, handing him a small folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper and found a drawing made with colored pencils. It showed 2 small figures holding hands, next to a larger figure lying on the ground, with a snake off to the side. Above the drawing, in clumsy, childish letters, was written "Get well soon," and signed Emily and Sophie. Something stirred in Arthur's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was a mixture of gratitude and curiosity that deeply unsettled him. Since Charlotte's passing, he had completely isolated himself from the world. avoiding any emotional connection that could bring more pain to his already fragmented life. "They're from the city orphanage," the nurse continued. "The director came to pick them up earlier, but she said they could visit you if you agreed. The little girls were very worried, asking if you were okay." Arthur closed his eyes, fighting against contradictory emotions. Part of him wanted to maintain his usual seclusion, but another part, a part that had lain dormant for years, felt inexplicably drawn to the idea of getting to know these brave children who had risked their own lives to save him. Meanwhile, at the city orphanage, Mrs. Eleanor Vance was facing a delicate situation. The twins had returned as heroes in the eyes of the other children, but she was deeply annoyed by all the attention the incident was generating. The phones wouldn't stop ringing, with journalists wanting to interview the girls and City Hall officials congratulating the institution. "Emily! Sophie! Come here immediately!" shouted Eleanor from her cramped office, where piles of paper accumulated on a worn wooden desk. The walls were covered with regulations and notices in fine print, creating a suffocating atmosphere that reflected her controlling personality. The twins entered hesitantly, still wearing their dirty clothes from the morning. Emily held her chin high in silent defiance, while Sophie hid behind her sister, her eyes red from crying on the way back to the orphanage. "You disobeyed my rules by running away from the group," Eleanor began, her sharp voice echoing through the small space. "Because of your irresponsibility, the entire institution is being unnecessarily exposed. I don't want any more of this kind of behavior." "But we saved the man," protested Emily, her voice small but determined. "He was in danger, and the snake was going to hurt him. We did the right thing." Eleanor clenched her fists. There was always something about that girl that deeply irritated her, an independence, an inner strength that challenged her absolute authority over the children of the orphanage. The right thing is to obey the rules and not cause trouble. You two will be in detention for a week, with no recess and no special activities. Sophie began to cry silently, but Emily remained firm. Is the man okay? Is he going to be all right? Her genuine concern for a stranger they had met by chance revealed a natural compassion that contrasted sharply with the cold, controlled environment of the orphanage. "That's none of your business," Eleanor replied dryly. "Go back to your rooms, and I don't want to hear another word about this." Later that night, when all the children were supposedly asleep, Emily got up silently from her bed and walked to the room where Sophie slept alone. She found her sister awake, holding a pencil and drawing by the faint light coming through the window. "What are you doing?" Emily whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'm drawing his face," Sophie replied softly, showing a surprisingly detailed sketch of the man they had saved. "I can't stop thinking about whether he's in pain. I wonder if he has a family. I wonder if someone is taking care of him." Emily looked at the drawing with admiration. Sophie had always had this special gift. She could capture not only people's physical features, but also their deepest emotions. In the drawing, she had depicted a sadness in the man's eyes that went far beyond the physical injury. "He seemed very lonely," Emily agreed. "Different from the sadness other people have when they get hurt. It was like the sadness I see in your eyes when you wake up from your nightmares." Sophie nodded, continuing to work on the details of the drawing. "In my dreams, there are always people who need help, but I can never save them. Today was different. We really helped someone." The two sisters remained silent for a few minutes, processing the extraordinary events of the day. They didn't know that, at that very moment, Arthur was in the hospital looking at the drawing they had left him, feeling for the first time in years a connection with other human beings. The next morning, Arthur was discharged from the hospital with instructions to rest for a few days. But instead of returning directly to his empty mansion, he made an impulsive decision that surprised him. He asked the taxi driver to stop at a flower shop before going home. Inside the small, fragrant shop, He found himself buying a modest arrangement of wildflowers, instinctively choosing species he had seen growing near the river where the girls had found him. Along with the flowers, he bought a box of high-quality colored pencils and a drawing pad. The florist, 63-year-old Mr. Anthony Miller, watched the unusual selection with curiosity. "Are these for someone special, Mr. Lexington?" He had known the businessman for years, but had never seen him buy flowers since his wife's funeral. "For two very brave girls," Arthur replied, surprised at how easily the words came out. "They saved my life yesterday." Mr. Miller smiled, carefully wrapping the gifts. "Children have a way of showing us what really matters in life, don't they?" Arthur nodded, but didn't reply. He didn't fully understand what he was doing or why he felt compelled to thank the twins personally. All he knew was that those two small children had awakened something inside him that he thought was dead forever. When he arrived at the city orphanage an hour later, he hesitated at the entrance, observing the austere two-story building with its barred windows and peeling walls. The place looked more like a prison than a home for children, and he wondered what kind of life Emily and Sophie had inside. What Arthur didn't know was that his simple decision to visit the orphanage was about to trigger a series of events that would reveal secrets buried for years, exposing lies that had destroyed innocent lives, and bringing him face to face with betrayals that would shake the very foundations of his carefully controlled existence. Arthur's reception at the orphanage was anything but warm. Mrs. Eleanor Vance met him at the entrance with a forced smile that couldn't hide her irritation. She had spent the morning trying to control the damage from the media exposure of the incident, and the last thing she wanted was more attention on the institution. "Mr. Lexington, what a surprise," she said, discreetly blocking the way into the building. "I hope you're feeling better. The girls were very worried, but I've already explained to them that it wasn't necessary to get further involved." Arthur held firmly to the gifts he had brought, noticing the woman's thinly veiled hostility. "I would like to personally thank Emily and Sophie. They saved my life, and I would feel terrible if I couldn't express my gratitude properly." "I understand your sentiment perfectly," Eleanor replied, maintaining her professional tone. "But the girls are being punished for disobeying the rules during the outing. It wouldn't be appropriate to reward them after inappropriate behavior." Through one of the first-floor windows, Arthur could see a small face watching the conversation. It was Sophie, her large eyes fixed on him as if memorizing every detail of his appearance. When their eyes met, she gave a timid wave before disappearing from the window. "I understand your position on discipline," Arthur said carefully, "but they acted with exceptional courage for 4-year-olds. Surely that must be recognized in some way." Eleanor crossed her arms, her patience wearing thin. There was something about this man's insistence that bothered her deeply. During her 20 years managing the orphanage, she had developed a rigid system of control that tolerated no outside interference. "Mr. Lexington, I appreciate your gratitude, but I have responsibilities to all the children here. If I start making exceptions for 2 of them, how will I explain that to the others? Besides, Emily and Sophie already receive special attention due to Sophie's behavioral problems." "Behavioral problems?" Arthur frowned, confused. The girl he had seen in the window seemed only shy and gentle. "Sophie has constant nightmares that disturb the sleep of all the other children. That's why she sleeps alone, separate from her sister. It's a difficult situation that we're trying to manage as best we can." Something in the way Eleanor spoke about the twins deeply bothered Arthur. There was a coldness, a lack of compassion that contrasted sharply with the dedication and courage the girls had shown the day before. "Perhaps I could contribute in some way to the institution," he suggested, trying a different approach. My company works with building materials. I can see some improvements that could be made to the building. Eleanor's eyes momentarily lit up with interest, but she quickly controlled her expression. That would be generous of you, but still I need to maintain discipline. The rules exist for a reason. At that moment, the door opened and Emily came running out, followed by a staff member trying to catch her. "Sir, you came to visit us!" she shouted, completely ignoring Eleanor's furious expression. The girl stopped abruptly when she saw the gifts in Arthur's hands, her eyes widening with surprise and joy. "They're flowers! Sophie, come see! He brought us flowers!" Sophie came down the stairs slowly, clearly torn between the desire to approach and the fear of disobeying more rules. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying recently. "Girls, go back to your rooms immediately," Eleanor ordered, her sharp voice echoing through the entrance hall. "You know you're in detention." But Arthur had already knelt down to the children's level, extending the flowers and the drawing materials. "This is for you, to thank you for saving me. You are the bravest girls I have ever met." Emily took the flowers with reverence, smelling each one and identifying the species with a precision that impressed Arthur. "This is a pansy, this is a straw flower, and this is a wild violet. How did you know I like flowers?" "It was a guess," Arthur smiled, feeling a strange emotion grow in his chest. "And this is for you, Sophie," he said, handing her the colored pencils and the drawing pad. "So you can make even more beautiful drawings." Sophie held the gifts as if they were treasures, her tears finally flowing freely. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one has ever brought presents just for us." The innocent statement hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. No one had ever brought them gifts. How was it possible that two such special children were so neglected? Eleanor intervened abruptly. "Mr. Lexington, I appreciate your kindness, but now I must ask you to leave. The girls have responsibilities to attend to." "Can I visit them again?" Arthur asked, addressing the twins directly. "I'd like to know how you are, maybe learn a little more about you." "You can?" Emily answered immediately, while Sophie nodded vigorously. "That can be discussed on another occasion," Eleanor said rigidly, "with the proper protocols and necessary approvals." As Arthur said goodbye to the girls, Eleanor walked him to the door, her mind working quickly. There was something about this man's persistence that worried her. In all her years at the orphanage, she had learned to identify people who could cause trouble, and Arthur Lexington was sending all the warning signs. "Mr. Lexington," she said, as they reached the entrance, "I need to be frank with you. Emily and Sophie are complex cases. They arrived here 2 years ago under very traumatic circumstances. They were completely abandoned, without any information about their families. It's a delicate situation that requires professional care." Arthur stopped at the door, turning to face her. "Abandoned? What do you mean? Left on our doorstep in the middle of the night, without documents, without explanation. Children in these conditions often develop attachment and behavioral problems. That's why I maintain strict rules. They need structure." Something about the story didn't sound entirely true to Arthur, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. "And there was never an investigation to find their families?" "Naturally. We followed all the necessary procedures," Eleanor replied quickly. "But sometimes people just disappear. It's a sad reality, but common in our work." Arthur nodded slowly, but his mind kept processing the information. There was something in Eleanor's eyes, a subtle evasiveness when she spoke about the girl's past, that bothered him. After he left, Eleanor returned inside the orphanage with a growing sense of anxiety. She found the twins still in the hall, Emily carefully arranging the flowers in a glass of water she had borrowed from the kitchen, while Sophie had already started a new drawing with her new pencils. "Take those things to your rooms and don't talk about this visit anymore," she ordered. "And remember, you're still in detention." But as the girls went upstairs, Eleanor picked up the phone in her office and dialed a number she knew by heart. After a few rings, a man's voice answered. "Jack, it's me. We have a problem. That businessman, Arthur Lexington, is asking a lot of questions about the twins. I think he could become inconvenient." The voice on the other end of the line grew tense. "What do you mean, inconvenient?" "He wants to visit them regularly. He's asking about their past. If he starts digging deeper..." "I understand. I'll take care of it. Keep him away for now, and let me know if he insists." Eleanor hung up the phone with a sigh. There were secrets buried 2 years ago that could not come to light, carefully constructed lies that protected interests far greater than the happiness of 2 orphan girls. And Arthur Lexington, with his inconvenient gratitude and persistent questions, was threatening to unearth truths that were meant to remain hidden forever. 3 days after his first visit to the orphanage, Arthur couldn't get Emily and Sophie out of his mind. Sitting at his desk in the distributor's office, he found himself staring out the window toward the city center, where he knew the twins were spending their days in detention. The drawing they had made for him was framed on his desk, replacing the old photo of Charlotte that he had put away in a drawer. Jack Fisher, his partner and general manager for 15 years, walked into the office without knocking, as he always did. He was a robust man of 48, with graying hair and an easy smile that won over clients and employees. Arthur had always considered him a brother, trusting him completely with the company's operational management. "Arthur, are you okay?" "The employees mentioned you seemed distant these past few days," Jack said, sitting in the chair across the desk, his eyes fixed on the framed drawing with curiosity. "Is that new?" "A gift from 2 very special girls," Arthur replied, noticing a strange expression flicker across Jack's face for a split second. "They saved me from a copperhead during my walk by the Green River." "Ah, yes. I heard about the accident. 2 orphans from the city orphanage, wasn't it?" Jack leaned forward, examining the drawing more closely. "Emily and Sophie, if I'm not mistaken. The whole town is talking about their courage." Arthur raised an eyebrow, surprised by Jack's detailed knowledge of the incident. "How do you know their names?" "News travels fast in a small town like Clear Creek," Jack replied quickly. But there was something forced in his casual tone. "Besides, our company has some contracts with the city. I sometimes hear talk about the municipal institutions. I'm thinking of visiting them again. Maybe make a donation to improve the conditions at the orphanage," Arthur said, watching his partner's reaction closely. Jack leaned back in his chair, his expression turning serious. "Arthur, as your friend, I need to warn you about something. You've spent the last 3 years isolating yourself from any emotional connection. It wouldn't be wise to get too involved with these children now. It could be dangerous for your psychological well-being." "Dangerous?" Arthur frowned. "Jack, they're 2 little girls who saved my life. What could be dangerous about that?" "That's exactly what worries me," Jack insisted. "You might be projecting feelings of gratitude into something bigger than it really is. What if these girls become emotionally dependent on you? What if you're disappointed when you realize they're just normal kids with normal problems?" There was something in Jack's argument that bothered Arthur, a subtle urgency that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "Since when did you become a psychologist?" "Since I started worrying about my best friend and partner," Jack replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just saying you should be careful. Orphanages are complex places with a lot of regulations and bureaucracy. Sometimes it's better to keep your distance." That afternoon, against Jack's advice, Arthur decided to return to the orphanage. This time he had prepared a formal proposal for improvements to the building, including estimates for roof repairs, painting the walls, and installing a more suitable play area for the children. Eleanor received him in her office with a forced cordiality, examining the documents he had brought. "Mr. Lexington, this is a very Generous proposal, but I need to discuss it with the board of directors before approving any modifications. Of course, Arthur agreed, but I'd like to see Emily and Sophie while I'm here. How are they adjusting after their punishment? Actually, they are still adjusting to the consequences of their actions, Eleanor said carefully. Perhaps it's better to wait a few more days before another visit. A few more days? But it's been 3 days. How long does this punishment last? Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Children like Emily and Sophie need to learn that actions have consequences, especially considering their problematic backgrounds. What problematic backgrounds? Arthur's voice grew firmer. They saved a person's life. That should be celebrated, not punished. Mr. Lexington, with all due respect, you don't understand the complexities of running an institution like this. Emily has rebellious tendencies that need to be controlled, and Sophie, well, her psychological issues require specific approaches. Arthur stood up abruptly. Can I see them now, just for a few minutes? Eleanor hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Sophie is unwell today. She had a crisis during the night and is under medical observation. What kind of crisis? The concern in Arthur's voice was genuine, which seemed to irritate Eleanor even more. Severe nightmares, as always. She screamed all night, disturbing the sleep of all the other children. That's why I insist on keeping her separate. And where is Emily? Emily is completing educational tasks in her room. Arthur had a feeling he was being deceived, but he couldn't prove anything. I'd like to leave some gifts for them. Drawing books and some flower bulbs that Emily can plant. That won't be necessary, Eleanor replied quickly. As I said, they need to learn about consequences. Constant gifts can send the wrong message. Frustrated but not wanting to create a bigger conflict, Arthur left the gifts at the reception and departed. But instead of leaving, he parked across the street and watched the building for an hour. During that time, he saw several children playing in the inner courtyard, but Emily and Sophie were not among them. When he finally returned to the company, he found Jack waiting in his office with a worried expression. How was the visit? Strange, Arthur admitted. Eleanor Vance seems determined to keep the girls isolated. And there's something about her attitude that I don't like. Maybe she's right, Jack suggested. If the girls are having behavioral problems, outside interference could make things worse. Or maybe, Arthur said slowly, she's hiding something. Jack tensed for a moment. What kind of thing? I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. That night, alone in his empty mansion, Arthur made a decision that would completely change the course of events. He picked up the phone and called Oswald Ray, a private investigator he knew by sight from the city's business circles. Oswald, this is Arthur Lexington. I need to hire your services for a delicate investigation. Of course, Mr. Lexington. What is it about? I want you to find out everything you can about 2 girls from the city orphanage, Emily and Sophie Carter, especially about how they got there and about their biological family. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Lexington, may I ask why this investigation is important to you? They saved my life, and I have a feeling that someone is lying about their past. I understand. I'll start the investigation tomorrow, but Mr. Lexington, if these girls are truly in a situation of abandonment, what do you intend to do with the information? Arthur looked again at the framed drawing on his desk, thinking of the sad but brave eyes of 2 girls who had touched his heart in a way he no longer thought possible. I don't know yet, Oswald, but I know I can't just ignore this. What Arthur didn't know was that his decision to investigate Emily and Sophie's past was about to unearth secrets that threatened not only the reputation of influential people in Clear Creek, but also the very fabric of trust and loyalty he had built throughout his entire adult life. Oswald Ray began his investigation the next morning, first visiting the Public Records Office at Clear Creek City Hall. As a 45-year-old former police officer, he had developed a network of contacts that facilitated his investigative work, especially when it came to cases involving vulnerable children. Martha O'Connell, a municipal archives employee for 20 years, had known Oswald since his time on the force and agreed to help him discreetly. "Oswald, I found the twins' entry record at the orphanage, but there's something strange here," she said, flipping through a yellowed file. "What do you mean?" "The official record says they were found abandoned on the orphanage doorstep in March of 2021, without documents or identification. But look at this." Martha showed him a second folder. "There's another older record that shows a woman named Rebecca Smith registered the girls for temporary entry into the orphanage in February of the same year." Oswald took the documents, comparing the dates and signatures. "Temporary entry? Does that mean she planned to pick them up?" "Exactly. And there's more. Rebecca Smith was a registered employee of Lexington Distributors until January 2021. She was fired for cause, according to this." The investigator felt a chill run down his spine. Rebecca worked for Arthur Lexington? From what the records indicate, yes. She worked there for 3 years as a cleaning and organizing assistant. Oswald discreetly copied all the relevant information and left the municipal archives with more questions than answers. If Rebecca had worked for Arthur, why didn't he recognize the girls' names? And more importantly, where was Rebecca now? Meanwhile, at the orphanage, Emily and Sophie were living through increasingly difficult days. Eleanor had tightened the restrictions on them, keeping them practically isolated from the other children under the pretext that they needed to reflect on their actions. The twins spent most of their time in their rooms without access to the courtyard or recreational activities. "Sophie, do you think we did something wrong by saving that man?" Emily asked, during one of the few times they managed to meet in the hallway. Sophie shook her head, her eyes red from crying. "I don't understand why Mrs. Vance is so angry with us. Ever since he came here, everything has gotten worse." "Maybe she doesn't like other people caring about us," Emily said, demonstrating a remarkable perception for her age. "Remember when that family wanted to meet us last year? She got angry then too and said we weren't suitable for adoption." Sophie vaguely remembered the young couple who had visited the orphanage looking for children to adopt. They had shown interest in the twins, but Eleanor had found various excuses to discourage them, talking about behavioral problems and special needs the girls supposedly had. "Emily, sometimes I dream about a woman with brown hair who used to sing to us," Sophie said quietly. "Do you think she's our real mom?" "I dream about her too," Emily admitted. "But Mrs. Vance always says we're abandoned orphans, that our family never wanted us." At that moment, they heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly separated, each returning to her room before Eleanor could find them together. On another side of town, Oswald continued his investigation by visiting old colleagues still on the police force. Sergeant Paul Matthews, a serious 52-year-old man, had worked with Oswald for over a decade before he left the force. "Paul, I need a favor. Can you help me locate a woman named Rebecca Smith? Last known residence here in Clear Creek, but she may have moved." "Of course, Oswald, but can I ask why you're looking for her?" "A separated family case. She has 2 daughters in the city orphanage, and the client wants to reunite the family." Paul typed the name into the police system and frowned. "Oswald, I found a record for her, but it's not what you'd expect to hear. Rebecca Smith was last seen in the state capital 6 months ago, living on the streets. There's a report that she was having problems with alcoholism and erratic behavior." "On the streets?" Oswald leaned forward. "But she was employed up until 2 years ago. What happened?" According to the records, she lost her job in January 2021 and couldn't find another. There are a few public disturbance incidents, always related to alcohol. Oswald jotted down the information, but something didn't add up. Paul, a woman doesn't develop alcoholism and completely lose control of her life in a matter of months. There's usually a trigger, a traumatic event. You're right, but unfortunately it's more common than we'd like to admit, especially with single mothers who lose their jobs and have no support network. Oswald thanked his friend and left, but his mind kept processing the information. He decided to take one more step in his investigation, talking directly to former employees of Lexington distributors who might have known Rebecca. Mary J. Stevens, who had worked in the company's cleaning crew for 15 years, remembered Rebecca well. She was a very dedicated young woman, always talking about her twin daughters with such affection. She'd bring their pictures, show off the drawings they made for her. And what about her dismissal, Mary? Do you know what happened? Mary looked around nervously before answering. Oswald, I don't know if I should be talking about this, but Rebecca wasn't fired for cause like the papers say. What do you mean? She found out something she shouldn't have, about materials being diverted, fake invoices. When she tried to talk to Mr. Lexington, Mr. Fisher said she was imagining things because of stress. Oswald felt his blood run cold, and then she started being harassed. Strange people would show up at her house. Phone calls in the middle of the night, threats. She got so scared, she started drinking to be able to sleep. Within a few weeks, she was completely destroyed. And the daughters? She brought the girls to the orphanage, saying it was temporary until she could get back on her feet. But then she disappeared, and no one ever heard from her again. Oswald thanked Mary and left the company with a new understanding of the case. Rebecca hadn't abandoned her daughters out of irresponsibility. She had been deliberately destroyed by someone who wanted to silence her about irregularities in Arthur's company. That afternoon, he called Arthur with his initial findings. Mr. Lexington, you need to sit down for this. Rebecca Smith, the twins' mother, worked for you until 2021, and there's evidence that she was systematically harassed until she developed severe psychological problems. The line was silent for a long moment. Oswald, that's impossible. I never had an employee named Rebecca. I would have remembered. Mr. Lexington, she worked for your company for 3 years as a cleaning and organizing assistant. The records are all here. But I don't remember. Arthur's voice was filled with confusion and growing horror. If she really worked for me, why did Jack never mention it when I talked about the girls? That's an excellent question, Oswald replied gravely. And I think your partner has some very serious explaining to do. What neither of them knew was that, at that very moment, Jack Fisher was in an urgent meeting with Eleanor Vance, planning a drastic solution to the growing problem that Arthur and his investigation represented for their carefully constructed schemes. The confrontation between Arthur and Jack happened the next morning in the distributor's office. Arthur had spent the entire night sleepless, mentally replaying all the years of partnership with the man he considered his best friend, searching for signs that might have revealed the betrayal he now suspected. Jack, I need you to explain why you never mentioned that you knew Emily and Sophie's mother, Arthur said as soon as his partner entered the office. Jack kept his expression carefully neutral, but Arthur could see an almost imperceptible tension around his eyes. What are you talking about, Arthur? Rebecca Smith. She worked here for 3 years, until January 2021. How is it possible that I don't remember her, but you know her daughters' names? Arthur, you went through a very difficult period after Charlotte's passing. It's natural that you don't remember all the employees from that time, Jack replied, sitting calmly in the chair. And as for the girls' names, like I said, the whole town is talking about them. Don't give me that story, Arthur said, standing up abruptly. "I hired a private investigator. He found out that Rebecca was fired for alleged cause, but the cleaning staff told me a very different version." Jack's mask of tranquility began to slip. "What version?" "That she discovered irregularities in the company, diversion of materials, fake invoices, and when she tried to warn me, she was threatened until she developed alcoholism and completely lost control of her life." Jack was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its usual cordiality. "Arthur, some business decisions are made to protect larger interests. You were always too idealistic. You let emotions interfere with practical decisions." "Practical decisions?" Arthur's voice rose. "Are you admitting that you purposefully destroyed an innocent woman's life?" "Rebecca wasn't innocent," Jack said coldly. "She was snooping through our records, copying confidential documents. She was a threat to the company's security." "A threat to security, or a threat to your criminal schemes?" Jack stood up slowly, all pretense of friendship vanishing from his face. "Arthur, you don't understand how the real world works. While you were living in your ivory tower, mourning the loss of your wife, I kept this company running. I made the necessary deals. I made the tough decisions." "What decisions?" Arthur felt a nausea growing in his stomach, but he needed to know the whole truth. "For the last 5 years, 30% of our profits have come from side deals, materials sold off the books, agreements with construction companies that needed to avoid taxes, partnerships with suppliers who offered special prices in exchange for documentary flexibility." The revelation hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. "You turned my company into a criminal operation." "I saved your company from bankruptcy," Jack retorted. "After Charlotte's passing, you became completely useless as a businessman. Someone had to take control. And Rebecca found out. Rebecca was a cleaning lady who started asking too many questions. She saw documents she shouldn't have seen, made connections a person of her education shouldn't be able to make." Arthur approached Jack, his voice low but filled with restrained fury. "And you decided to destroy her instead of just firing her." "She threatened to report us. She said she had proof, that she was going to come to you directly. I had no choice but to neutralize the threat." Neutralize? Arthur could hardly believe the words he was hearing. "You talk about a mother of 2 small children as if she were an enemy of war." In the world of business, Arthur, that's exactly what she was. At that moment, the office door opened, and Oswald entered unceremoniously. "Mr. Lexington, sorry for the intrusion, but I've discovered something urgent you need to know immediately." Jack turned to the investigator with a dangerous expression. "This is a private conversation." "A conversation about Rebecca Smith and her daughters?" Oswald asked, ignoring Jack's hostility. "Then it's a conversation I'm definitely a part of." "What did you find out, Oswald?" Arthur asked. "I found Rebecca Smith. She's alive, but she's in a rehab clinic in the state capital. And Mr. Lexington—" Oswald looked directly at Jack before continuing. "She's not just a victim of alcoholism. She was systematically drugged for months to make her appear mentally unstable." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack had visibly paled, but his expression remained defiant. "How did you find that out?" Arthur asked, his voice almost a whisper. "I talked to neighbors from her old house. They remembered strange men showing up regularly, leaving drinks as a gift. Rebecca started drinking these beverages and quickly developed a dependency. But it wasn't just alcohol dependency, there were other substances mixed in." Arthur turned to Jack with an expression of utter disgust. "You poisoned an innocent woman. I protected our business interests using efficient methods," Jack replied without a hint of remorse. "And if you keep investigating, you might find out things about your dear Charlotte that you'd rather not know." What do you mean by that? Jack smiled coldly. Your wife wasn't the saint you imagined, Arthur. Charlotte knew everything. She knew about the diversions, the side deals, the undocumented operations. And not only did she know, she was my silent partner. Arthur's world collapsed completely in that moment. That's a lie. Charlotte received 15% of all the side profits. She's the one who suggested some of the most lucrative schemes. Where do you think she got the money for all those trips, all that expensive jewelry she bought without you knowing? Arthur sat down heavily, his mind struggling to process the double betrayal, not just from his partner, but from the woman he had loved and mourned for 3 years. And when Rebecca found this out, Jack continued mercilessly, Charlotte was terrified you'd discover the truth. It was her idea that I take drastic measures to silence Rebecca permanently. Drastic measures, Arthur murmured. Charlotte's accident wasn't exactly an accident, Jack said, watching with cruel satisfaction the impact of his words. She was on her way to meet me that rainy night to discuss the Rebecca situation. She was nervous, driving too fast, taking the tranquilizers I had given her to control her anxiety. Oswald slowly approached Jack. Are you confessing to have indirectly caused his wife's death? I'm explaining that consequences have causes, Jack replied, and that some people make choices that lead to inevitable outcomes. Arthur stood up slowly, his legs trembling. Get out of my company now. Your company. Jack laughed. Arthur, you still don't get it, do you? This company runs on my network of contacts, my deals, my operation. Without me, you have nothing. You'll be bankrupt in 6 months. I'd rather be bankrupt than complicit with a criminal. Criminal? Jack picked up his briefcase and headed for the door. Arthur, you're so naive. This is the real world of business. And now that you know the truth, you have a choice. You can continue to be my silent partner, or you can find out what happens to people who become too inconvenient. After Jack left, Arthur collapsed into his chair, covering his face with his hands. Oswald approached cautiously. Mr. Lexington, I know this is a lot to process, but there's something more urgent. Eleanor Vance and Jack are planning to transfer the twins to another city. I have information that they will be removed from the orphanage within the next 48 hours. Arthur looked up, a new determination shining through the pain. Then we have 48 hours to save them. That night was the longest of Arthur's life. Sitting in his empty mansion, he alternated between rage, grief, and a growing determination to right the wrongs that had been committed in his name. The revelation about Charlotte had shaken the foundations of everything he believed about his past, but his most urgent concern was Emily and Sophie. At 5 in the morning, his phone rang. It was Oswald with more disturbing news. Mr. Lexington, I've confirmed the plans to transfer the girls. They will be taken this afternoon to a private orphanage in Eastwood, supposedly because the city orphanage is overcrowded. Eastwood? But that's 3 hours from here, Arthur said, now wide awake. Exactly. And that private orphanage has a very questionable reputation. There are rumors that it accepts children without proper documentation and asks few questions about legal procedures. Arthur dressed quickly and headed to the city orphanage, determined to stop the transfer by any means necessary. When he arrived, he found unusual activity at the building, several people coming and going with papers, and a van parked out front. Eleanor greeted him at the entrance with an expression of false concern. Mr. Lexington, what a surprise to see you so early. I'm sorry to inform you, but Emily and Sophie won't be able to receive visitors today. They are being transferred to an institution more suited to their special needs. What special needs? Arthur's voice was controlled, but there was a dangerous edge to it. As I mentioned before, Sophie has severe psychological problems that require specialized treatment. and Emily has developed aggressive tendencies that we can't properly control here. I want to see them before the transfer." "That won't be possible," Eleanor replied firmly. "They are already being prepared, and any outside interference could cause further psychological trauma." Arthur tried to push past her, but two burly men appeared, blocking his path. They were not orphanage employees. They looked like private security guards or thugs. "Mr. Lexington, please don't make this situation more difficult than it needs to be," Eleanor said. "The girls are being transferred for their own good." At that moment, a small, desperate voice echoed from a second-floor window. "Mr. Arthur, help!" It was Emily, shouting through a partially open window. Next to her, Arthur could see Sophie's terrified face. The two girls were clearly terrified. "Emily! Sophie!" shouted Arthur, again trying to get past the men blocking him. "Mr. Lexington, I'll have to ask you to leave immediately, or I'll call the authorities," Eleanor threatened. "Call them," Arthur replied. "I want the authorities to see exactly what's happening here." It was then that Oswald appeared, accompanied by two people Arthur didn't recognize, a middle-aged man in a formal suit and a young woman with a folder of documents. "Mr. Lexington, this is Dr. Richard Price from the District Attorney's Office and Ms. Anna Fisher, a court-appointed social worker," Oswald said. "They are here to investigate allegations of irregularities in the twins' documentation." Eleanor's face turned visibly pale. "What irregularities? All our procedures strictly follow legal standards." Dr. Price approached with authority. "Ms. Vance, we have received a formal complaint alleging that documents related to the entry of Emily and Sophie Carter into this institution were falsified. There are also accusations that the planned transfer for today does not follow proper protocols." "That's ridiculous," Eleanor protested, but her voice trembled slightly. "I can present all the necessary documentation." "That's exactly what we intend to examine," said Miss Fisher, "and we also need to interview the children immediately, before any transfer." The two burly men looked at each other nervously, clearly unprepared to deal with official authorities. One of them whispered something in Eleanor's ear, and she nodded tensely. "Of course, we will cooperate fully with the investigation," Eleanor said, trying to regain her composure. "But I must warn you that the girls are in a very fragile emotional state today." While the adults discussed legal protocols on the ground floor, Emily and Sophie remained locked in a room upstairs. They had been woken up before dawn and told they were being transferred to a better place. But the tense atmosphere and the serious faces of the adults terrified them. "Sophie, we have to get out of here," Emily whispered, examining the locked door. "Something very bad will happen if we go to that other place." Sophie was clutching her drawings, including the one she had made of Arthur in the hospital. "But how? The door is locked, and the window is too high." Emily carefully surveyed the room, using her natural intelligence to assess escape possibilities. The window overlooked the sloped roof of the ground floor annex, and there was a nearby tree with branches that seemed sturdy enough to support a child's weight. "Sophie, do you trust me?" "I've always trusted you," Sophie replied without hesitation. "Then we're going out the window. It's dangerous, but staying here is even more dangerous." As the sisters planned their desperate escape, the investigation on the ground floor was revealing increasingly serious irregularities. Dr. Price had found significant discrepancies between different versions of the girls' entry documents. "Ms. Vance, this document says the children were abandoned in March 2021, but this other record shows a voluntary and temporary entry in February of the same year. How do you explain this contradiction?" Eleanor shifted uncomfortably. "Sometimes there are necessary adjustments to documentation when family situations prove more complex than initially apparent." "Adjustments?" Dr. Price's voice grew colder. "Ms. Vance, falsifying documents of minors is a serious crime." At that moment, screams from the upper floor interrupted the conversation. Through the window, everyone could see Emily helping Sophie carefully climb down the annex roof, using tree branches for support. "My God, they're going to get hurt!" shouted Miss Fisher, running toward the stairs. Arthur was faster, running to the outside of the building where he could see the girls dangerously descending. "Emily! Sophie! Wait, I'm here!" The twins heard his voice and stopped on the roof, looking down with visible relief. "Mr. Arthur, we don't want to go to the other place," shouted Emily. "You're not going anywhere against your will," Arthur replied, positioning himself under the tree. "Come down slowly and I'll help you." Eleanor appeared at the building's door, accompanied by the two burly men. "Mr. Lexington, you are interfering with legal procedures," she shouted. "The only illegal procedures I see here are yours," replied Dr. Price, who had come out behind her. "Ms. Vance, this transfer is cancelled until we complete our investigation." It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. Sophie, in the middle of her descent, tripped and slipped from the branch she was holding. For a terrifying moment, she hung suspended by only one hand, her little feet dangling in the air. "Sophie!" screamed Emily, trying to reach her sister. Arthur didn't hesitate. He climbed the tree with surprising agility for a 52-year-old man, reaching Sophie before she completely lost her grip. With careful movements, he helped her down until she was safe in his arms. "It's okay," he whispered, hugging the trembling girl. "You're safe now." Emily came down right after, and the two sisters clung to Arthur as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had become completely chaotic. "Please don't let them take us," pleaded Sophie, her tears soaking Arthur's shirt. "I won't," he promised, an iron determination growing in his chest. "I will never let anyone hurt you again." "Veal!" What Arthur didn't know was that Jack was watching the whole scene from a car parked across the street, speaking urgently on the phone with someone who was clearly not happy with the way events were unfolding. The official investigation at the orphanage lasted for 3 tense hours, during which Emily and Sophie remained under the protection of Ms. Anna Fisher in a separate room. The girls answered the social worker's questions with a devastating honesty, revealing details about their treatment that shocked even professionals experienced in child abuse cases. "Sophie always had nightmares because Mrs. Vance said our mom would never come back because she didn't want us," Emily recounted, holding her sister's hand tightly. "And when I tried to comfort her, she would say I was being rebellious and that rebellious children don't get new families." Sophie showed her drawings to Ms. Fisher, including several disturbing illustrations depicting sad children behind bars and adults with angry expressions. "I draw what I see in my dreams," she explained in her small voice. "But since Mr. Arthur showed up, I've started dreaming about beautiful things too." Meanwhile, in Eleanor's office, Dr. Price was meticulously analyzing all the documents related to the twins. What he discovered confirmed the worst suspicions about systematic irregularities in the documentation. "Ms. Vance, these documents clearly show that Rebecca Smith registered her daughters for temporary care, not permanent abandonment. How do you justify the subsequent alteration of this documentation?" Eleanor tried to maintain her composure, but sweat began to appear on her forehead. "As I explained earlier, when family situations deteriorate, we sometimes need to make adjustments to protect the children's well-being. Protection does not include falsifying legal documents," Dr. Price replied dryly. "And there is another disturbing issue here. We found records that several adoption attempts for the twins were discouraged by negative psychological reports that do not match the behavior we've observed today. Children can be very manipulative when they want to impress visitors," Eleanor said, but her voice was losing conviction. At that moment, Oswald entered the room with more devastating evidence. "Dr. Price, I managed to get in touch with Rebecca Smith at the rehabilitation clinic in the state capital. She is willing to talk about what really happened to her daughters." Eleanor's face turned completely pale. That can't be possible. Rebecca is... She's in no condition to... In no condition for what? Asked Dr. Price, noticing the revealing reaction. Oswald put his phone on speaker, and a weak but determined female voice echoed through the room. Hello, this is Rebecca Smith. I want my daughters back. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor clung to the desk as if she needed physical support. Miss Smith, said Dr. Price, can you tell us what happened when you left your daughters at the orphanage? I never abandoned my girls, Rebecca said, her voice filled with emotion and renewed determination. I left them temporarily because I was being harassed, threatened. People would show up at my house in the middle of the night. My phone would ring constantly with threats. I started drinking because it was the only way I could get to sleep. Who was threatening you? Men who worked for Jack Fisher. They said if I told Mr. Lexington about the diverted materials from the company, something very bad would happen to me and my daughters. Arthur, who had been authorized to participate in the investigation, felt nausea rise in his stomach. Rebecca, this is Arthur Lexington. May I ask, do you remember me from when you worked at the company? There was a pause, then a muffled sob. Mr. Arthur, do you really not remember me? I worked for you for 3 years. I always showed you pictures of my girls, talked about how smart they were. The guilt that washed over Arthur was devastating. Rebecca, I am deeply sorry. I went through a very difficult period after my wife's passing, and many memories from that time are blurry. I understand, Mr. Arthur, but you need to know that your daughters saved my life. When I heard that Emily and Sophie had helped you, I realized I had to fight to get sober and get my family back. Eleanor stood up abruptly. This conversation is completely inappropriate. The woman is clearly under the influence of medication and cannot be considered a reliable source. Ms. Vance, Dr. Price said coldly, you are being formally charged with falsification of official documents and neglect in the care of minors. You have the right to remain silent and to request a lawyer. This is absurd. I have dedicated my entire life to the care of these children. Eleanor protested, but her indignation sounded false even to herself. At that moment, the 2 burly men who had tried to stop Arthur attempted to leave the building discreetly, but Oswald intercepted them. Gentlemen, you'll need to stay to give a statement as well. One of the men, apparently the leader, glanced nervously at Eleanor before speaking. We were just hired for security. We didn't know anything about fake documents. Hired by whom? Asked Dr. Price. By Jack Fisher. He said some people might try to interfere with the children's transfer and that we needed to ensure the procedures were followed. The revelation that Jack was directly involved in the attempted forced transfer of the twins confirmed Arthur's worst suspicions about the extent of his ex-partner's corruption. Dr. Price, Arthur said, I would like to formally request temporary custody of Emily and Sophie while their mother completes her rehabilitation. Mr. Lexington, that is a complex issue that requires careful evaluation, the prosecutor replied, but considering the circumstances and the evident bond the children have formed with you. Please, came Rebecca's voice over the phone. Mr. Arthur, if my babies trust you, I trust you too. Can you take care of them until I'm completely well? Emily and Sophie, who had been brought back into the room, ran to Arthur upon hearing the conversation. Mr. Arthur, is that our mommy? Asked Sophie, her eyes shining with a hope she hadn't shown in 2 years. Yes, my dear, it's your real mommy. Mommy, it's us, Emily and Sophie, shouted Emily towards the phone. We miss you so much. The crying that echoed through the phone touched the hearts of everyone present. My babies. Mommy is getting better, so I can take care of you again. Mr. Arthur will take care of you until then, okay? Okay, Mommy, they both answered in unison. Dr. Price observed the interaction with professional interest. "Mr. Lexington, I will authorize temporary custody, but with social worker supervision and regular visits to assess the children's well-being." "I accept all conditions," Arthur said immediately. Eleanor, realizing she had completely lost control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt. "You don't understand. There are bigger forces involved in this. If you mess with the plans of certain people, you will all regret it." "What people?" asked Oswald, approaching her. "Jack has connections, influential people who don't like it when their business is disturbed." It was then that Dr. Price made a decision that would completely change the dynamics of the investigation. "Mr. Lexington, Oswald, I think it's time we involved the FBI in this case. We are clearly dealing with a corruption network that goes beyond local irregularities." As the adults discussed the next legal steps, Emily and Sophie snuggled against Arthur, finally feeling safe after months of fear and uncertainty. They didn't know that their journey was far from over, and that the coming days would bring even more shocking revelations about the extent of the criminal network that had controlled their lives for so long. Outside the orphanage, Jack watched the events unfold through his car window, speaking urgently on the phone with someone whose voice was clearly agitated on the other end of the line. The operation he had carefully built for years was crumbling, and he knew that desperate measures would be necessary to protect interests far greater than the life of a sentimental businessman and two inconvenient children. Emily and Sophie's first night in Arthur's mansion was a mix of wonder and anxiety. The girls had never been in such a large house, with spacious rooms, private bathrooms, and a kitchen that seemed like something out of a dream. Arthur had quickly set up a room for them, placing 2 beds side by side so they could be together after 2 years of forced separation. "Mr. Arthur, can we really stay here?" Sophie asked for the 10th time, reverently touching the soft curtains on the window that overlooked a well-kept garden. "Yes, you can, my dear. This is your home now for as long as you need," Arthur replied, watching as Emily carefully explored every corner of the room, touching the furniture as if it were made of crystal. But the apparent tranquility was shattered by an urgent call from Oswald at 10 o'clock at night. "Mr. Lexington, I need to warn you about something serious. Jack has disappeared. No one has seen him since this afternoon, and there are signs that he removed important documents from the company." Arthur felt his stomach turn cold. "What kind of documents?" From the preliminary reports I got from employees, he took contract files, financial records, and especially all the computers from the administrative office. He's clearly trying to destroy evidence." "And that means?" "It means he knows we're close to discovering the full extent of his schemes, and desperate people do desperate things." That same night, in a discreet hotel on the outskirts of Clear Creek, Jack was meeting with 3 men who had arrived from the state capital. They were people he had done business with for years, suppliers who actively participated in the schemes of diverted materials and who now saw their own interests threatened. "Jack, you promised this operation was secure," said Charles Drummond, a 55-year-old businessman who controlled several construction companies in the metropolitan area. "Now we have prosecutors asking questions and investigators digging through documents." "The situation can still be controlled," Jack replied, but there was sweat on his brow. "We just need a few weeks to reorganize operations and transfer activities to other cities." "And what about Arthur? He knows too much now," said Robert Andrews, another partner in the corruption network. "A man with remorse is dangerous for all of us." Arthur has always been emotionally weak. Since his wife's passing, he's been making decisions based on feelings, not business logic. This fixation on the 2 orphans is just another example of that. "Then we need to use that weakness against him," suggested the 3rd man, Michael Sanders, who had connections with local politicians. "If something happened to the girls—" "No," Jack said quickly. Violence against children would draw too much attention. We need a more subtle approach. What kind of approach? We'll use the legal system against him. Eleanor still has contacts at Child Protective Services. We can claim that Arthur is emotionally unstable, that he's projecting his grief over his wife's loss onto the children. With the right documentation, we can have the twins removed from his custody. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Arthur watched Emily and Sophie finally relax for the first time in months. Sophie was drawing in a new sketchbook, creating colorful illustrations of birds flying free, while Emily examined the garden plants through the window, identifying species with impressive accuracy. "Mr. Arthur," Emily said suddenly, "what will happen when our mommy gets better?" The question hit Arthur unexpectedly. In the last few hours of emotional intensity, he hadn't fully considered the long-term implications of his impulsive decision to seek custody of the girls. "You'll be with her, of course," he replied, trying to sound casual. "A child should be with her real mother." Sophie stopped drawing. "But what if? What if we want to stay with both of you, with Mommy and with you?" Arthur knelt down to the girl's level. "That would be wonderful. But adult things are complicated. The important thing is that you have a family that loves you." "Do you love us?" Emily asked with the frankness typical of children. The question made Arthur pause. In just a few weeks, these two brave girls had filled a void in his life that he didn't even know existed. "Yes," he said finally. "I love you both very much." The twins smiled and returned to their activities, but Arthur remained troubled by the realization that he had grown attached to the girls much more deeply than he thought possible. The next morning, Dr. Price called early with worrying news. "Mr. Lexington, we've had developments overnight. Eleanor Vance has been released on bail, and there's information that she's planning to contest your temporary custody of the girls. On what grounds? Allegations that you are emotionally compromised and not suitable to care for traumatized children. They have fake psychiatric documentation that supposedly proves the twins have mental instability, requiring specialized institutional care." Arthur felt fury rise in his chest. Fake documentation? Unfortunately, it's hard to prove it's fake without independent examinations, and that could take weeks. In the meantime, a conservative judge might decide the children should return to institutional custody. "I won't allow that. Mr. Lexington, I understand your position, but you need to work within the legal system. Any impulsive action can be used against you." And after the call, Arthur found the twins having breakfast in the kitchen, chatting excitedly about plants and drawings. The normality of the scene contrasted sharply with the legal machinations that threatened to separate them again. "Girls," he said carefully, "we might need to travel for a few days. What do you think about visiting the state capital and seeing your mommy?" Both of their eyes lit up. "Can we really see Mommy?" asked Sophie. "Yes, we can, and maybe she's already well enough to spend some time with us." What Arthur didn't tell the girls was that he had decided to leave the state temporarily while he organized a more robust legal defense. Oswald had suggested that staying on the move would make it harder for them to use the local legal system against him. 2 hours later, as they were quietly leaving the mansion with some luggage, Arthur noticed a dark car parked across the street. When he started his own car, the vehicle began to follow them. His heart raced as he realized that Jack and his associates had decided to take a more direct approach. "Girls, do you like adventures?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "We do," they replied in unison. "Then hold on. We're going to have to take some different routes to get to our destination." As Arthur maneuvered through the streets of Clear Creek, trying to shake his pursuers, Emily and Sophie remained oblivious to the danger, excited about the prospect of seeing their mother again after 2 years of separation. They didn't know that their journey toward family reunification was about to become a desperate escape from forces that would do anything to prevent the truth about years of corruption and abuse from coming to light. Arthur's phone rang, and Oswald's voice sounded tense. "Mr. Lexington, where are you? I just received information that there's a warrant being prepared to take the girls. They're claiming you've kidnapped them." "Jack is always one step ahead," Arthur muttered, watching the dark car still following them in the rearview mirror. "Oswald, it seems we have no choice but to move forward with our travel plans and hope we can get to Rebecca before they catch us." The trip to the state capital turned into a race against time. Arthur had managed to lose the car that was following them by taking an alternate route through smaller towns, but he knew it was only a matter of time before Jack discovered his whereabouts. The twins were sleeping in the back seat, exhausted from the tension of the last few days, when his phone rang again. "Mr. Arthur, this is Rebecca," said the familiar voice, but there was something different in her tone, an urgency that wasn't present in the previous conversation. "I need to tell you something very important. I remembered something that could change everything." "What did you remember?" "Before I got sick, I managed to hide some evidence of Jack's schemes. Recordings of conversations, photographs of documents. It's all stored in a safe place, but there's something else. I found out that Charlotte wasn't just complicit in the diversions." Arthur's stomach turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "She was the mastermind behind a large part of the schemes. It was Charlotte who convinced Jack to expand the operations, who suggested the contacts with corrupt politicians. Jack was just the executor." The revelation hit Arthur like a blow. To discover that his wife not only participated in the corruption, but was one of its chief architects, completely destroyed the image he had of their 20 years of marriage. "Rebecca, are you sure about this?" "I have recordings of her planning new schemes, discussing how to use the company's name to legitimize fraudulent operations. Mr. Arthur, Charlotte was not the woman you thought she was." Emily stirred in the back seat, murmuring something in her sleep. Arthur lowered his voice. "Where is this evidence?" "Hidden at my sister Catherine's house in Oak Ridge. But Mr. Arthur, there's something more urgent. I heard that Jack contacted some very dangerous people. He's not just trying to protect local schemes. There's a much larger network involved." "What kind of network?" "State politicians, businessmen from several cities, even judges. Your company's operation was just a small part of something much bigger, and now that it's all being exposed, these people are willing to do anything to protect their interests." Arthur looked in the rearview mirror, watching the girls sleeping peacefully. "Rebecca, do you think they are in real danger?" "I think we all are. But Mr. Arthur, I need to tell you the truth about why I left the girls at the orphanage. You already explained about the threats. It wasn't just that." Rebecca interrupted, her voice heavy with emotion. "Jack told me that if I didn't disappear from the city completely, he would do something terrible to Emily and Sophie. He knew where they were at the orphanage. He had direct contact with Eleanor. I left them there because I thought they would be safer away from me." "My God," Arthur murmured. "For 2 years, I lived with the terror that he could carry out his threats at any moment. I started drinking not just because of the harassment, but because it was the only way to cope with the guilt of having abandoned my daughters to protect them." Arthur had to pull the car over to the shoulder to process all the information. The complexity of the situation was far beyond what he had imagined. They weren't just dealing with local business corruption. They were facing a criminal network that had operated for years without detection. "Rebecca, where are you exactly?" Is the clinic safe? I don't know anymore. Earlier today, I saw strange men talking to the administration staff. I think they've found out where I am. Get out of there immediately. I'm coming to get you. No, Mr. Arthur. It's too dangerous. Take the girls to Oak Ridge, to my sister's house. Catherine lives at 247 Acacia Street. She has the evidence and can help you stay safe. And you, I'll try to get there on my own. I know routes they don't know. After he hung up, Arthur remained parked on the shoulder for several minutes, trying to reorganize his thoughts. His life had become a nightmare in a matter of weeks, but looking at Emily and Sophie, sleeping in the back seat, gave him a strange clarity of purpose. Those children had saved his physical life that day by the river, but now he realized they had also saved his soul, giving him a reason to fight that he had lost with Charlotte's passing. 2 hours later, they arrived in Oak Ridge late in the afternoon. Acacia Street was a quiet residential area with modest houses and well-kept gardens. Catherine Smith, Rebecca's sister, was a 40-year-old woman with a face marked by worry, but she welcomed Arthur and the twins with warm hugs. "Emily, Sophie, look how you've grown," she said, hugging the girls who barely remembered their aunt. "Rebecca told me everything that happened. You are so brave." Catherine led them into the simple but cozy house, offering food and explaining the situation while the girls explored the small living room with curiosity. "Mr. Arthur, when Rebecca brought those documents here 2 years ago, she was terrified. She said she had discovered things that could put very powerful people in prison, but that could also get her killed if anyone found out." "Did she say where the documents are?" "They're hidden in the basement, inside a waterproof box. But Mr. Arthur, I need to warn you about something. This morning, some men were here asking questions about Rebecca. I didn't like the look of them at all." Arthur felt the danger approaching again. "What kind of questions? If I knew where she was, if I'd kept in touch, if she had left anything here. I lied, of course, but I have a feeling they didn't believe me." At that moment, Sophie approached Arthur with a drawing she had just made. It was a portrait of 3 faces, hers, Emily's and his, surrounded by colorful hearts. "Mr. Arthur, I drew our new family," she said with a smile that made his heart ache. "It's beautiful, my dear," he said, hugging her. But over her head, he signaled to Catherine that they needed to talk in private. When the girls were distracted playing with some toys Catherine had saved from when her own children were young, the 2 adults met in the kitchen. "Catherine, I think we need to get the documents and leave this city tonight," Arthur said quietly. "If Jack and his associates have found this address, it's only a matter of time before they get here." "I agree, but where will you go?" "I don't know yet. Maybe to another state until we can safely deliver this evidence to the federal authorities." Catherine nodded and led them to the basement, where a metal box was hidden behind shelves full of homemade preserves. Inside, Arthur found dozens of photographed documents, recordings on small digital devices, and even some handwritten notes from Charlotte detailing future plans for expanding the criminal schemes. "This is enough to bring down not just Jack, but the entire network," Arthur murmured, leafing through the documents. "Rebecca risked everything to get this evidence," Catherine said. "I hope it's worth it." It was at that moment that they heard the sound of cars stopping in front of the house. Catherine ran to the kitchen window and turned pale. "It's them, 3 cars, several men." Arthur quickly grabbed the box of evidence. "Is there a back exit?" "Yes, but they've probably surrounded the house." The sound of heavy footsteps on the front porch sent the twins running to Arthur, their large eyes filled with the fear he had hoped never to see in them again. The battle for their lives and for justice was just beginning, and Arthur knew that the next few hours would determine not only Emily and Sophie's future, but also whether the truth about years of corruption and abuse would finally come to light. The escape through the back of Catherine's house turned into a desperate race through the neighborhood's backyards. Arthur carried the box of evidence while holding tightly to Sophie's hand, while Emily ran beside them with a courage that was impressive for a 4-year-old. Catherine guided them through a labyrinth of alleys and passages she had known since childhood. "This way," she whispered, leading them through a vacant lot covered in tall weeds. "There's a church 2 blocks ahead where we can ask for help." Behind them, they could hear voices shouting instructions and the sound of gates being forced open. Jack's men were systematically searching every house in the neighborhood, determined to find them before they could escape with the evidence. "Mr. Arthur, I'm scared," Sophie murmured, her small legs struggling to keep up with the adults. "I know, my dear, but you are very brave," he replied, scooping her up into his arms without slowing down. "Remember when you saved me from the snake? Now it's my turn to protect you." Emily looked back nervously. "Are they bad men like Mrs. Vance?" "Yes, but we won't let them hurt us," Arthur promised, impressed by the girl's perception of the situation's gravity. When they reached the church, Father Anthony, an elderly 70-year-old man who had known Rebecca years before, welcomed them without asking questions. He had experience helping families in difficult situations and immediately understood the urgency. "Come, there's a basement where you can hide," he said, leading them through the sacristy. "Catherine told me about Rebecca's troubles. I always knew she was a good person in an impossible situation." In the church basement, while Emily and Sophie snuggled in a corner with some children's books the priest had brought, Arthur finally had time to examine in detail the evidence Rebecca had collected. What he discovered surpassed his worst expectations about the extent of the corruption. The recordings revealed conversations between Charlotte and Jack, planning not only diversions of materials, but also schemes for over-invoicing on public works, bribes for inspectors, and even a plan to create shell companies that would receive government contracts without proper bidding. But the most shocking discovery came from a recording made just 1 week before Charlotte's accident. In the recording, she discussed Rebecca and the evidence the employee had begun to collect with Jack. "Jack, this woman has become an unacceptable risk," Charlotte's voice said on the recording. "If she manages to get documentary proof of our operations, it won't just be a matter of firing her. She could destroy years of work." "What do you suggest?" Jack replied. "Permanent solutions for permanent problems. What if something happened to her? An accident, perhaps?" The recording continued with details that made Arthur's stomach turn. Charlotte wasn't just suggesting threats. She was actively planning to harm Rebecca irreversibly. "My God," he murmured, pausing the recording. "She was really planning." Father Anthony, who had come down to check on them, noticed the devastated look on Arthur's face. "My son, sometimes we discover that the people we love were not who we thought they were. It is one of the deepest pains a human being can experience. Father, how can I explain to these girls that I fought to save them from people who included my own wife? How can I look at them knowing that Charlotte wanted to destroy their mother? We are not to blame for the sins of others, my son. What matters are the choices we make when we discover the truth." At that moment, Catherine came down the stairs with an urgent expression. "Arthur, I got in touch with Rebecca. She's on her way, but there's bad news. Jack found out where she was and tried to intercept her on the road." "Is she okay?" "She is, but it was a close call. She managed to escape, but now she's sure they'll do anything to stop you from delivering this evidence to the authorities." Arthur looked at Emily and Sophie, who had fallen asleep in each other's arms, exhausted from the tension of the last few days. Their innocence contrasted sharply with the brutal reality of their situation. "Catherine, I need to make a difficult decision. If we stay together, we're all at greater risk. Maybe it's better if I deliver the evidence alone, while you keep the girls safe." "No," came a firm voice from the stairs. It was Rebecca, who had arrived silently at the church. She was visibly shaken, her clothes dirty and hair disheveled, but her eyes shone with a determination Arthur hadn't seen before. "I'm not separating from my daughters again." The twins woke up at the sound of their mother's voice and ran to her, crying with relief and joy. "Mommy! Mommy!" they shouted, hugging her tightly. "My babies!" sobbed Rebecca, holding them as if she would never let go. "Mommy was so afraid I'd never see you again." Father Anthony watched the family reunion with tears in his eyes. "This is the miracle I've been praying for 2 years," he said softly. But the joy of the moment was interrupted when Rebecca turned to Arthur with a grave expression. "Mr. Arthur, there's something else you need to know. I got more information about Charlotte's accident." "But what did you find out?" "It wasn't an accident. The evidence I collected includes records from a mechanic shop that received specific instructions to sabotage her car's brakes." The silence that followed was deafening. "Are you saying that Jack killed his own partner to protect the schemes? Charlotte had become too ambitious. She was making demands he considered excessive. And when she started talking about eliminating witnesses like me, he decided she herself had become an inconvenient witness." Arthur sat down heavily, the weight of all the revelations finally hitting him completely. Not only had he discovered his wife was a criminal, but that she had been eliminated by her own criminal partner when she became inconvenient. "Mr. Arthur," said Emily, approaching him with concern in her small eyes, "are you sad?" He picked her up, along with Sophie. "I'm sad about some things I've discovered, but I'm very happy to have you two in my life." "We're happy too," said Sophie. "Can you, Mommy, and us be a big family now?" The innocent question touched the hearts of all the adults present. Rebecca approached and placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Mr. Arthur, I know you have every right to walk away from us after everything you've found out, but I want you to know that it would be an honor to consider you part of our family." "The feeling is mutual," he replied, hugging the three of them. "But first, we need to make sure Jack and his associates are brought to justice. These children deserve to grow up in a world where they don't have to be afraid." Father Anthony intervened gently. "I have a contact in the FBI who can help you. Someone trustworthy who can't be bought or intimidated." "Then that's what we'll do," Arthur said, feeling an iron determination grow in his chest. "We'll finish what Rebecca started. We'll expose the whole truth, no matter how much it hurts." That night, hidden in the church basement, an unconventional family, but one united by love and the determination to do what was right, prepared for the final battle against forces that had operated in the shadows for years. Emily and Sophie slept peacefully for the first time in months, protected in the arms of their real mother and the man who had chosen to love them as if they were his own daughters. But outside, in the dark streets of Oak Ridge, Jack and his associates continued their desperate search, knowing that their freedom and possibly their lives depended on silencing forever the only people who held enough evidence to destroy them completely. The morning brought a resolution that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Federal agent Mark Oliver arrived at the church before dawn, accompanied by a small team of agents specializing in financial crimes. Father Anthony had known Mark since he was young and trusted his integrity completely. "Mr. Lexington, the evidence you've collected is extraordinary," and the agent said, after carefully examining all the documents and recordings. "With this material, we can dismantle not only the local operation, but a corruption network that spans 3 states. Arthur held tightly to the hands of Emily and Sophie, who remained close to him and Rebecca. The girls had woken up early and were visibly nervous with the presence of so many unknown adults, talking about serious things they didn't fully understand. "Agent, our biggest concern is the children's safety," Rebecca said, her voice firm despite the visible tension. "Jack and his associates have shown they will do anything to protect their interests." "I understand perfectly. That's why we will execute all arrests simultaneously in a coordinated operation that will begin in 2 hours. Jack Fisher, Eleanor Vance, and all known members of the network will be detained before they can react. "And what about the politicians and businessmen involved?" asked Arthur. "The evidence is sufficient to press charges against 23 people in positions of power. It will be the biggest corruption scandal this region has ever seen." Sophie tugged on Arthur's sleeve. "Mr. Arthur, does this mean the bad men won't chase us anymore?" He knelt to her and Emily's level. "Yes, my dear. It means you will be safe to grow up, play, and be happy without fear. And can we all stay together, you, Mommy, me, and Emily?" she asked, her large eyes full of hope. Arthur looked at Rebecca, who nodded with tears in her eyes. "Yes, we can. We're going to be a real family." The first news of the operation's results arrived at noon. Jack had been arrested at his home, trying to burn documents in his backyard when the federal agents arrived. Eleanor was found in a hotel near Eastwood, apparently trying to flee to another state. Charles Drummond, Robert Andrews, and Michael Sanders were detained in their respective offices, all clearly not expecting that the protection network they had built over the years could be dismantled so quickly. "Mr. Lexington," Agent Mark said over the phone, "Jack is trying to negotiate a plea bargain in exchange for more information about other corruption cases. Apparently, the network was even larger than we suspected. And what about the false accusations against me regarding the girl's custody? All dropped. Dr. Price has already been informed of the real situation, and there are no longer any legal questions about the family you have formed." That afternoon, at Catherine's house, which had become a safe haven for the reunited family, something extraordinary happened. Emily was in the small backyard, planting flower seedlings that Arthur had brought especially for her, when she made an observation that deeply touched all the adults present. "Mommy, Mr. Arthur," she said, standing up with her hands dirty with soil, "do you know why I like plants so much?" "Why, my dear?" asked Rebecca, sitting beside her on the grass. "Because even when it seems like they're going to die, if someone takes care of them with love, they bloom again, like our family." Sophie, who was drawing nearby, looked up from her paper. "And do you know why I like to draw happy faces?" "Why?" asked Arthur, approaching the group. "Because when I draw happy people, I feel happy too, and now I have real happy people to draw." She showed them her latest drawing, 4 figures holding hands in front of a house, all smiling. At the top of the paper, in her careful letters, was written, "My family that saved me." Rebecca covered her face with her hands, too emotional to speak. Arthur sat down beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders in a way that felt completely natural. "Rebecca, there's something I need to tell you," he said softly. "For all those years after Charlotte's passing, I thought I would never be able to love again. I thought my heart had closed permanently. And now?" she asked, looking at him with curiosity. "Now I realize my heart wasn't closed. It was just waiting for the right people to open it. You and the girls have taught me that family isn't about blood or social conventions. It's about choosing to love and protect one another." Emily and Sophie came closer, hugging them in a tight group. "Does this mean you're going to get married and will be a real family on paper too?" Emily asked, with the frankness typical of children. Arthur and Rebecca looked at each other, smiling. "If your mother agrees," he said. "I agree," Rebecca replied without hesitation. "I agree with everything that means building a life together, protecting our daughters, and honoring the second chance we've been given." 6 months later, in a simple ceremony at the same church where they had hidden during their most dangerous days, Arthur and Rebecca were married before a small group of friends and family. Emily and Sophie served as flower girls, wearing dresses they had helped choose themselves, carrying baskets of flower petals that Emily had grown in her new garden. The trial of Jack and his associates lasted 8 months and resulted in convictions ranging from 5 to 15 years in prison. The corruption network was completely dismantled, leading to the recovery of millions of dollars in diverted public funds and the complete overhaul of inspection systems in several cities in the region. Eleanor was sentenced to 8 years in prison for document forgery, child neglect, and participation in corruption schemes. During her trial, she finally confessed that she had received regular payments from Jack to keep the twins isolated and discourage adoption attempts, ensuring they remained available for possible transfer when needed. Dr. Price, who had become a family friend throughout the legal process, visited them regularly to monitor the girls' development. "It's extraordinary," he commented during one of these visits, watching Emily teach Sophie about different types of flowers, while Sophie made detailed portraits of each species. "Children who have gone through such severe trauma rarely recover so completely." "They are extraordinary," Arthur agreed, watching his daughters with the evident pride of a loving father. "But I think the secret was that we never allowed them to lose hope. Even in the most difficult moments, they kept the faith that good things could happen." "And you proved them right," said Rebecca, joining the group with a tray of homemade lemonade. "You proved that brave people can change the world, even when that world seems to be against them." That afternoon, as the sun set over Clear Creek, the family that had been formed through extraordinary circumstances gathered in the garden of their new home. Emily was showing Arthur how to care for a new species of rose she had planted, while Sophie worked on her latest art project, a mural on the wall of the room she shared with her sister, depicting the story of their journey from the orphanage to the family they had built together. It was a story of suffering turned into hope, of losses that became discoveries, and of 4 people who had found in each other not just safety and love, but also the purpose and meaning they had lost or never had the chance to discover. In the end, Emily and Sophie had not only saved Arthur from the copperhead that fateful morning, they had saved his soul, his ability to love, and his faith in human kindness, creating a family that was living proof that even the darkest stories can have luminous endings when brave people choose to do what is right. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.